Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. There are times when the things that haunt creep in softly, like a thought or a shadow, or a voice whispering your name from somewhere. Not every haunting comes with flickering lights or loud noises. And sometimes the things that scare us the most don't always come from beyond, and they aren't so quiet. Some wait outside windows, watching for someone too young to know better. Others step right inside, uninvited. They don't rattle chains or whisper from the dark. They smile, and then they do terrible things. These monsters are made of flesh and blood and hard to escape. From unseen forces that press in from the walls to people who wear normalcy like a mask, these are the things that don't need to ask permission to terrify you. So, let's get started, shall we? When I was in high school, I spent part of summer break with my best friend and his family in the countryside of Japan. His grandparents lived in a small, traditional home surrounded by quiet roads and dense trees. They gave me my friend's mom's old childhood room to sleep in. It was simple: floor mattress, desk, a couple of shelves, and there was this wall closet that looked like it had been built into the room decades ago. But the thing that always caught my attention was this other door. Small, maybe 1.5 feet tall, maybe 3 feet wide. It was built into the wall just above the closet. I remember thinking the design was strange, almost like a compartment that wasn't meant to be found. At first, I didn't think too much of it. I was too jet-lagged. The heat and humidity made sleeping a challenge anyway. I'd stayed up late, tossing and turning, scrolling on my phone until the early hours. But I noticed that whenever I turned the lights off at night, something about that small closet space made me uncomfortable. The shadows in the room settled naturally everywhere except that one spot. It always seemed darker there, heavier. After a while, I started to adjust to the time difference and was finally getting some sleep. But one morning, toward the end of the second week, I woke up and noticed that the little door was open, just slightly, about 1 inch or 2. Nothing too crazy, but I was sure that it had been closed before. I got up, closed it gently, figured maybe it hadn't been latched all the way and just came loose. Still, I couldn't help but stare at it for a while afterward, like I was trying to convince myself it was just old hinges and nothing more. A couple nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night. No real reason, no sound or jolt, just this wave of discomfort that crept in the second my eyes opened. The room was dim, kind of dark, where you can barely make out shapes. But the first thing I noticed was the small door was open again. Only this time it wasn't cracked. It was wide open. And inside of it, whatever was behind that door, was pitch black. Not shadowy, not dark like the rest of the room, just black, like it swallowed all the light. That's when I realized I was frozen. I'd never experienced sleep paralysis before. I'd only read about it, heard people talk about it. But this was something else. I couldn't speak. I couldn't shift my weight. I was locked in place. My heart was pounding, and my eyes were fixed on the opening above the closet. I couldn't see anything inside, but I could feel it. The darkness wasn't just visual. It was a feeling, like it was reaching out, stretching toward me in a way that I can't explain. Not fast, not slow, just steady. Like something was aware of me. Like something wanted to be seen, but was waiting for me to truly look. I don't remember falling asleep after that. I must have. I woke up in the morning with the door tightly shut again. Just like it had never happened. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't want to sound crazy, and honestly, I wasn't even sure I believed it myself. But later that day, I brought it up to my friend. Kept it casual, just asked if he remembered that weird little door in his mom's old room. He paused and then kinda laughed. Did it open on its own? I nodded. His smile dropped a bit. My mom said the same thing happened to her growing up. She always said that there was something off about that room, something in the walls. Now you know why I gave it to you. When we got back home at the end of the trip, I saw his parents again. His mom sort of teased me in a way that adults do when they already know the answer to a question. So, she said, handing me my suitcase. I heard you met the ghost. She was smiling, but her eyes were serious. She glanced at her son, then back at me. That little door used to open for me too, you know. She said this almost like it was nothing. It was always in the middle of the night, and it was always darker than the rest of the room. It really gave me the creeps growing up. She didn't offer anything else, just gave me a knowing look, like she wasn't surprised at all. I didn't ask any follow-up questions. I think part of me didn't want to know more. This was a long time ago, about 25 years ago. I had tree trimmers out at my house for the last 2 days. I lived alone at the time. I did have the presence of mind to set out some men's shoes on the porch, but after being there for 2 days, for someone who was paying attention, it was pretty obvious I was a single woman. The night the crew finished up, I was upstairs in bed. It was late, around 1 a.m. My car was in the driveway. My bedroom light was on, so it was obvious someone was home. I was in bed reading when I heard a noise downstairs. It was a familiar noise, but I couldn't quite place it. I laid there listening and heard it again, followed by the sound of things falling onto the floor. It hit me then what the noise was. One of my window screens being pushed open, followed by books that I had lined up along the windowsill, falling. I was totally frozen in fear for a minute, just laying there, all of my senses on high alert. Then I heard another thumping noise, what I assume was the sound of feet landing on the wooden floor. There was someone in my fucking house. That's when I grabbed the bat that I had next to the bed, and I grabbed the phone. This was before cell phones, back in the times of landlines and cordless phones, and that's when I realized I'd left the cordless downstairs. I locked my bedroom door and started screaming that I knew they were in there, that I had a gun, and I was on the phone with the police. I proceeded to pretend like I was on the phone with 911. I opened my bedroom window and removed the screen, getting it ready in case I had to jump out my window. I don't know if it was me opening the window, maybe my screaming, but something set off my neighbor's dog. They started barking and moving around, which turned on the motion sensor lights in my neighbor's backyard. I went to stand at my door with my ear pressed against it listening, still continuing my fake 911 conversation. It was an old house with wood, creaky stairs, so if they started up the stairs, I'd hear them. It was dead silent. And then I heard scuffing noises, the sound of the window downstairs rattling, followed by the sound of someone running beneath my bedroom window. Something scared him off, and he jumped back out the same window he came in. I went to my window and looked out, but I couldn't see anything. Whether it was me yelling that I was armed, pretending like the police were on their way, or the dogs, I'll never know. I had to get the cordless phone to call the police. I knew where it was, sitting on the kitchen table. I stood there listening for a long, long time, looking terrified. I really thought that I might have a heart attack. I was shaking. My heart was beating fast. I had so much adrenaline running through my body. Finally, I unlocked my door, had my bat at the ready, and crept down the stairs, into the kitchen, grabbed the phone, and then I took off, running up the stairs. I locked the door and called 911, waiting until they arrived. I walked with them while they inspected the house. The window in the study was standing open, the screen removed. Books I'd had lined up along the window were scattered on the ground. It was damp out, and there were bits of dirt and leaves on the floor from someone's shoes. Outside the window was a step stool taken from my garage. I'll never forget seeing the bits of leaves and mud on the floor. It was proof that someone had actually been in my house. He'd been standing in my study. He knew I was home when he made entry. One of the first things the cops asked was if I'd had any work done on the house recently. Tree trimmers. I'm sure it was one of them. They'd been around for 2 days, long enough to get the general idea of the house layout and to ascertain I was a single female. I was so scared after that to stay in my house. I felt so incredibly lucky he got scared off, but what if he came back? I felt violated, and I was angry. I spent the next few months either staying with my mom or having someone stay at the house with me. The only reason that window was unlocked was because the lock was broken. I had that fixed, and for extra insurance, I put nails in it so that they would block the window from being opened. I would have installed a security system, but I simply couldn't afford it at the time. The company was contacted, but there was no proof that it was anyone from their crew, so there wasn't a whole lot that anyone could do. Anyway, that was terrifying to me, to be a young woman alone in her house at night and hearing someone climb through a window. It makes you feel incredibly vulnerable. I'm very, very lucky. If I hadn't been awake, I wouldn't have heard him, and things may have ended very differently. The ambulance company I used to work for had a haunted ambulance, Rig 12. A lot of EMTs had their own stories about it, mostly involving weird noises coming from the patient compartment or the electronics going haywire. I never put much stock into paranormal stuff in general, but my experience was with my partner and I, and it was in Rig 12, posted in a rural community around 3 a.m. It was pitch dark and dead quiet. We were both dozing up in the cab. I was in the driver's seat and she was in the passenger seat. I woke up to a muffled voice. I initially thought my partner was trying to talk to me. I told her I was trying to sleep. I rolled over toward the window and closed my eyes again. Then I distinctly heard a male voice say, "Oh my God, am I dying?" Followed by what sounded like heavy breathing for a couple of seconds and then complete silence. My partner and I both sat straight up and looked back into the patient compartment where it sounded like it came from. It was quiet for a couple of seconds. Then we heard the click of an oxygen bottle regulator and hissing like it was leaking. I turned on the compartment lights and we both piled out of the rig. Initially, I thought a transient may have climbed in the back while we were asleep, was messing with stuff. So we walked around the back of the rig, opened up the back doors. No one was back there. I checked both oxygen bottles. Neither were opened. Needless to say, we kept the lights on in the rig and didn't sleep much after that. I don't know if I believe in hauntings, but I guess it would make sense for an ambulance to be haunted. Rig 12 had been in service with various agencies for over a decade. It'd probably seen its fair share of patients die in the back. I rode in it a couple of shifts after that, but nothing else strange happened that I can recall. My son and I live on a ground floor apartment. The unit isn't ideal. I would have preferred one on a higher level, but those are 2 or 3 bedroom apartments, bigger, more expensive ones, way out of my price range. It was a miracle I barely got us into this one with my income. Rent in Denver is astronomical, and I don't make enough to be able to save much after bills. To compensate for my day job's pay, I had to get a night one. Usually this gets me home by 4. I've learned to function off of a few hours of sleep and converted my religious views from agnostic to coffee. I love it almost as much as I love my son. Hell, coffee allows me the ability to be a good mom. It's kept my mind sharp and engaged. Who's tired? Not me. But in all seriousness, I've been on this schedule for 6 months, and it's all started to creep up on me. I thought I was slowly starting to lose my mind. The tiny little hallucinations I'd experienced, they were all part of sleep deprivation. I got used to the shadow people standing in my peripherals, hearing disembodied voices. At the beginning, I'd have to verbally remind myself they're not real, I'm just tired. But eventually I could ignore them like I did the other interlopers I'd walk past on the sidewalk. A few nights ago, I got home from work and saw someone looking in my son's bedroom window. That's what I thought. It faces out the back of our apartment, and there's a tall bush that almost touches the glass. The path I take from the parking lot leads me around the side of the apartment, and I saw them standing in between the bush and the wall. But when I did a double take, the figure standing there was gone. I deduced it to being another shadow man that I'd got close to catching a peek at. In my foggy brain, it was humorous, but after getting whatever small amount of sleep I got, I remembered the slow shadow man, and it didn't strike me as funny anymore. While my son ate breakfast, I decided to go outside and take a look around. I'm glad I did. I found a pair of big footprints under my son's window. I'd say they were work boots based on the shape and size and tread. When I went back inside, I went into his room and pulled up the blinds to see that the wood frame of his window looked like its alignment was off. Like one side was pushed up a smidge more than the other. The window opened straight up and down like a ghillie. It's heavy, too. My son knows not to touch the window. So I went back outside, this time with a kitchen chair. I'm pretty short, and I needed to get a better view of the outside window pane. The bush outside had done its fair share of scratching, nicks on the glass and the paint closest to its reach. As I was about to step off the chair back down to the dirt, I used the wood pane to balance my movement, and it was by sheer coincidence that my finger brushed across an exceptionally prominent scrape in the wood. It was deep, and the wood was splintered. I climbed back onto the chair and looked at where my hand had just been. I don't know how I missed it with my first scan, but when I looked again, there were clear indications that someone had tried to jimmy the window open with something sharp. Had these been there before we moved in, or did it just happen the night before? I don't believe the person I saw when I came home was a figment of my imagination. I think I caught someone in the act of trying to break into my 8-year-old son's bedroom in the middle of the night. I didn't want to scare him or let him know anything was wrong, but I needed to know if he'd seen or heard anything out of the ordinary. So I asked him, was it loud when the shrub outside his window sways around in the wind against the window? And this I can't explain past a mother's bond with her son, but I swear we had some sort of telepathic thing going on. because when he moved his eyes that were fixed on his breakfast up to me, his whole expression acted as if I'd stumbled upon a little secret of his, and he just looked at me with his eyebrows all raised but didn't say anything. So I asked, "What's wrong?" And he just started crying. He told me about how he thought the plant was talking to him, that it sounded like Elmo. Its branches would scrape up against the glass and ask him to come out and play, but he'd always say that he couldn't, that he had to go back to bed. How many times had this happened? I asked. He put up his pointer finger, adding that the bush wouldn't talk to him in the daytime. Then he says he figured out that it was a man, and he just started renting the bushes to live in. All of this seemed like it checked out well and good for my son, but the man continued to tap on the window. Now not behind a disguise, but as a new neighbor who didn't have any friends. My son still refused, so the guy started asking if he could come into the apartment to hang out. He tells the man, "I'll have to ask my mom," but that made the guy so angry that he put a knife up to the window, showing it to my son. When my son tells me what he said, the cute adolescent mispronouncing of words he's never heard puts me in a cold sweat, because it's like, in my head I'm going, "I know what you're trying to say, but I can't believe that's actually what you're saying." He used cuss words and said that if I tell anyone he's there, he'll boochar my mom when she leaves for work. "Mom, what does boochar mean?" I enunciated the difficult tch sound and asked, "Do you mean butcher?" He nods his head yes. He couldn't remember how long the man had been visiting his window. He'd been trying to pretend like he was asleep, staying very still when the guy would arrive, but he can hear him messing with the window every night until he wakes up again. I was distraught and heartbroken that I'd put my son in such a scary situation. It would have only been a matter of time until that guy found a way inside. Even more scary is that he knows my schedule. He knew my son was alone in the apartment. He'd been watching me leave for work every night. I called in sick, kept him home from school that day. I was embarrassed and I didn't want him telling the teachers the story. I got in contact with a police officer who came over and inspected the window and the bush. They found remnants of someone being there, a meth pipe, a knife. The discovery made me sick to my stomach. They said that they'd be sending patrol cars out to check on the apartment throughout the week, but I wasn't going to risk leaving my son there anymore. I considered borrowing a gun, waiting for the man to show up again. But I knew that would only incite more trauma for my son, especially if I had to pull the trigger. So for the last week, our new schedule has consisted of him going to work with me, sleeping in the back seat of the car until my shift is over. Every night I park in full view of our security cameras, and I'm always walking outside to check. He knows if there's ever an emergency, he can run in at any time. Thankfully, though, he's been able to sleep throughout the night. This alternative routine, it puts a ton more work on me, trying to get us both up and ready, but it's worth it if it's going to keep my son safe. Right now, I'm just trying to take it day by day. I don't really have a plan past this one. I know sleeping in the car isn't the best for him, but it's our only option, at least until I can think of something better. Any suggestions would be appreciated. I've got 2 stories, not super dramatic, but both moments that still make my skin crawl when I think about them. The first happened at home. I was in bed, hovering in a weird in-between state, not fully asleep, not fully awake. You know the place. Everything's a little floaty, and the lines between dreaming and reality start to blur. And that's when I felt a hand on my hip, just resting there, warm but familiar. Then, soft kisses on my shoulder and the back of my neck. The kind of thing that would have been romantic if it wasn't, way too late for that kind of attention. I remember mumbling, "Really? Now?" Thinking it was my husband making a move after we'd already been laying in silence for what felt like forever. I opened my eyes and saw his back. He was facing away from me, breathing slow and steady, dead asleep. I froze. The kisses had stopped, but I could still feel the pressure of a hand, firm and steady, right on my hip. I didn't move, didn't say anything. I just laid there, too scared to even sit up, until eventually whatever I'd felt, or whatever had felt me, let go. I didn't tell my husband about it until the next morning, and even then I played it off like a weird dream, but I know what I felt, and I know I wasn't dreaming. The second thing happened at work. I was a nurse working nights at the time. It was around 2 a.m. Most of the floor was quiet, patients asleep, lights dimmed, the usual low hum of machines and nighttime stillness. I was doing my rounds, walking past an unoccupied room, when I noticed the TV inside was on. Now, that wasn't totally unheard of. Sometimes a tech forgets to turn it off during cleaning, or the remote gets wedged right in between and flips itself on. Still, I figured I'd just step in and shut it off. No big deal. I stepped 1 foot into the room, didn't even fully enter, and that's when the TV said, clear as day, "Good morning, Alice." That's my name. The voice wasn't part of a commercial. It wasn't a news anchor or a show host. It was talking to me. The tone was flat, almost mechanical, but the timing, it couldn't have been a coincidence. I didn't shut the TV off. I backed out, closed the door, and just stood there in the hallway staring at it for a few minutes before walking away. I switched to day shifts not too long after that. I've got a weird one that happened to my uncle on Evergreen Way in Everett back in the 90s. It was late, and his girlfriend was driving him home from the movies. They'd just gone to see Good Will Hunting in the theaters and apparently had a few drinks while the show was playing, and maybe after. Neither of them would have blown a legal breathalyzer, and it was a torrential downpour that night. This added to the caution his girlfriend would take driving them home. His girlfriend worked at a coffee stand on that road. She was actually familiar with a couple of members of the unhoused population. They would come up to her window, asking for free shit, or be so brazen enough to try to nab the tip jar. They're laughing at all the crazy work stories that she's telling as they pass the stand. It's closed down for the night. From the direction they're going, Evergreen turns into a hill. She said she could take her foot off the gas and coast down, tapping the brakes a few times to not go too fast. It's not a steep hill, but it goes for a while, and it's easy to pick up speed. They can see a couple 100 yards ahead of them on this street. They can see the streetlights ahead of them switching colors, regardless of any vehicles present, and a gas station on the corner with the rotating streetlights. This was Uncle and his girlfriend's second date together, and he thought that up until that point, things had been going really good on their date. The windshield wipers are at their highest level and just barely providing enough for her to see. My uncle had offered to drive, but she'd gotten permission to use her dad's Cadillac for their date, so she was insistent that she drove. And in her defense, she was a really safe driver given the circumstances. Unc didn't have any concerns until something caught his eye, a few 100 yards down the hill. There was a man. He wore a tie-dye blanket like a kind of psychedelic mage. The backpack he wore under the largely brightly colored cape made him look disfigured, like a hunchback as he leaned on the damaged aluminum walker with a single yellow tennis ball on one of the legs. Unc points him out to his girlfriend, who's already noticed him, and she doesn't look amused anymore. Her funny stories had stopped, but the sound of rain on the roof of the car was loud enough to fill its space. The stories she'd been sharing with Unc were lighthearted, but all pivoted around very real what-the-fuck situations, ones that she'd been in. Along with those, she had a handful of not-so-lighthearted situations she'd been in. Apparently, Tie-Dye Mage was one disgusting piece of shit, one that she was always calling the cops on because he was constantly harassing her and the other baristas. But specifically, he put this girl through a particularly traumatic situation when she was on a smoke break. He approached her with a pair of garden cutters and his pants around his ankles. He was grunting like a gorilla, and his hood was pulled over his eyes, and his long brown and silver beard, it had food and other unidentifiable crusties stuck in it. She thought that he was robbing her. She put her hands up while telling him that all she had was dry erase markers in her pockets. He kept the cutters extended towards her. So she starts pulling them out and throwing them on the ground to prove that's all she had. But with his other hand, he opened the tie-dye cape, exposing himself to her. With his pants around his ankles, she was able to make an easy escape back to the coffee stand, to lock the windows and doors, and to make another call to the police. All while the guy stood outside, scratching up the side of the coffee stand with the rusty garden tool. That resulted in him going away for another few weeks, but it never prevents him from always wandering back to Evergreen when he got out again. That assault story was not mentioned during her monologue that had them both laughing a minute ago. It would be mentioned when they got back to her parents' house and were sitting in the driveway. But before that, Unc had no idea, and as they're coasting down the hill, she puts her foot back onto the gas pedal, and he feels the SUV start to pick up speed. He asks if she sees him standing on the curb. She tells him yeah, but the Cadillac continued to gain momentum down the hill. He says the guy looks handicapped. If he steps into the street, he wouldn't be quick enough to move back onto the curb. She says something like, he's not handicapped, and if he steps out onto the street, he's gonna die, because I'm going too fast to slam on my brakes in the rain. I won't be able to stop in time. It'll be his fault. Whatever it was verbatim that she told Unc, it was clear she knew exactly what she was doing. And she'd been thinking about it since she saw him far in the distance. She probably saw him before Unc did, and the whole time, she's in the driver's seat, plotting. At the bottom of the hill, it's a straight shot to the light where the guy's located. Unc's gripping his seat as they're getting closer. In his head, he's thinking he's going to either be an accessory to murder, or he's going to have to work with the police to ensure himself that he never gets with this girl again. He was having a moral dilemma of tremendous proportions. Grabbing the steering wheel would kill them both if the SUV lost control, and so the only choice was to sit back in his seat, watch the show taking place out the front windshield. 100 yards quickly turned to 50, and sure enough, the tie-dye mage set his walker off the curb and steps into the road. Unc's stomach sinks like a rock. They had approximately 20 yards before the SUV would make contact. It looked like the homeless man was dancing in their lane and expecting them to swerve around, but she was gripping the steering wheel with both hands and no plans to change lanes. All Unc had time to do was put his hands in a half-hearted attempt to block his face from the shards of glass and human corpse that would potentially be flying his way. With his eyelids glued open, he sees the homeless man dissolve into nothingness as the hood of the Cadillac goes through him without making a sound or any vibrations from the expected thud. The tie-dye man dematerialized from their viewpoint over the dashboard. Then, the road in front of them grew like a concrete wall. Unc still had his arms out in front of him when the passenger airbag deployed and shattered one of his wrists and most of the bones in the fingers. The big, sturdy vehicle they'd been driving had just gone from 50 to 0 within a fraction of a second. This was on account of a pothole the size of a bathtub in the far right lane on Evergreen. The whole front of the SUV had been swallowed by a jagged pit made of concrete, metal, and asphalt. The airbag on the driver's side releases with enough velocity to knock the girl unconscious. It takes Unc a second to regain his sense, and then using only one of his hands, he gets his door open and climbs out of the vehicle. The day's rain had accumulated close to a foot of water in the hole, and when he climbed out, it was impossible not to be soaked. Then he crawls his way out of the pothole. It was waist deep, and when he turned around, he saw the SUV with its back end at a 60-degree incline. Its front end was completely crushed and hidden under the pavement of Evergreen Way. He looked in all directions and quickly discerned how alone they were out there. The streets were vacant of anyone except him. His girlfriend hadn't exited the Cadillac, but Unc was too injured from the accident to climb back in and check on her status. There was a gas station across the street at the same four-way intersection. They let him use their phone to call for help. The girl would rise from the pothole before ambulances arrived. She was bruised, but overall got out of it unharmed. They were taken to the hospital to be evaluated. While they were both in the ER waiting room, they discussed not bringing up the homeless man when they were asked about what happened. It wasn't a necessary part. They were driving down Evergreen Way, doing the speed limit with their SUV, and it was destroyed by an unmarked construction area. There was a sign set up, but the wind blew it into the pothole earlier that night. She never saw the tie-dye man return after that. They were both convinced that what they saw that night was his ghost, but what they can't agree on is if he was trying to help them avoid the pothole, or if he was leading them to it. Unc thought that he was hoping she'd swerve to avoid him, but she never stopped believing that he influenced her to fall in that pothole. Coaxed her, per se. So what do you think? Let's say that it was a ghost. Do you think someone could still maintain human infatuations after death? Personally, hearing that story, I think he was trying to get them to avoid the pothole and didn't expect her to go right for him. Maybe he did. I'll be checking the comments periodically. I want to see if you all think this ghost did that shit on purpose or not. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining me. Whether it's your first time or you're a regular, your support means the world over here. We've got brand new episodes every Friday night, and keep those eyes open long enough for those deep sleep videos. And of course, subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. A special thanks to the Darkest Hour channel members: Lori TESDAHL, Sarah Marie, Robert Bailey, T. COLTDADDY Eagle, Mallory Dominguez, KARI WATKINS, PILAR TREDEN WIXSON, Larry Hill, Ripley, JOJO STARCHER, Mary Patrick, Debbie LAFRENIERE, Julie Bourdelais, Jennifer BECK, MARINA LACHNER, Make Hamilton Home, Evan Pratt, Mary Hineline, Katharine, Yes.ImtherealKatie, Isabelle, Land Shark, and Danielle Hecht. Big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to the Darkest Hour patrons: Tracy S., Mary H., Tanya F., Tamara K., Monica L., Zoe Watt, Shelley B., Donald C., Marion T., Rat Girl, Alicia S., Aaron G., Nikki H., Mr. Revenant, Naz K., Brendan G., Paul T., Nicholas C., Tony P., Lizanne, Arlene F., Adrian, T.F. Parham, Jason G., Lori T., and Bobo Jenkins. If you want to support the Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining our Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour or click the link in the description to learn more. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, Amanda, darkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.